"If you have the balance, I'll pay you double," mocked the manager as he watched a simple man request $1 million transfer. What he didn't know was that he was humiliating the actual owner of the bank. Minutes later, the truth exploded like a bomb throughout the entire branch. And that's how arrogance turned into dismissal, and appearances once again fooled the foolish. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. Silas Armstrong woke up even before the sun rose on that September morning on his farm on the outskirts of Willow Creek, rural Pennsylvania. The birds singing composed the morning symphony he so appreciated. At 58 years old, his face, marked by time and work in the fields, told stories that words could never express. His calloused hands caressed the fur of Braveheart, his faithful caramel-colored dog, who slept beside his rustic wooden bed. "Good morning, companion. Today is a special day," he murmured as he got up and walked to the window to observe his property. Acres of well-tended land, coffee plants aligned in perfect rows, and in the distance, cattle grazing peacefully. Silas put on his favorite faded plaid shirt, worn denim pants, and completed the look with his inseparable straw hat. He drank strong coffee accompanied by cheese bread prepared by Aunt Josephine, his housekeeper for over 20 years. "Are you really going to the big city today, Mr. Armstrong?" asked Aunt Josephine, a woman in her 70s, with attentive eyes and always busy hands. "Yes, Josephine, I am. It's more than time I personally visited that bank I bought. I want to see how they treat simple folk there." Silas was much more than he appeared. Behind that humble figure of a countryman hid one of the most successful businessmen in the country. Born in poverty, he had started working on the farm as a boy, studying at night in a rural school lit by a lantern. Over time, he saved every penny, bought his first piece of land, and with hard work and foresight, transformed that small plot into an agribusiness empire. At 30, he diversified his investments. At 40, he acquired his first technology company. At 50, he was already the majority shareholder of several companies, including Horizon Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the United States. However, very few people knew his face. He made a point of maintaining his privacy and continuing to live simply, true to his origins. "The car is ready, boss," announced Julian, his driver and trusted friend, interrupting his thoughts. "Will you want to take any luggage?" "Just one change of clothes, Julian. I'll be back tomorrow. It's just a quick visit." While Julian put the small bag in the truck's trunk, Silas received a call from his daughter, Louise, a successful lawyer who lived in New York City. "Dad, are you sure you want to do this? I can send someone trustworthy for this inspection. You don't need to go personally." "Daughter, some things we need to see with our own eyes. I want to experience firsthand what it's like to be an ordinary customer at that bank. Only then will I know if all that money invested was worth it." Louise sighed on the other end of the line. She knew her father's stubbornness well. "All right. But call me as soon as you arrive. And remember, Paul Henderson, the regional manager, doesn't know you personally. He's only seen old photos of you from business magazines, and even then you were wearing a suit. It will be quite a surprise." "That's the idea, my daughter," Silas replied with a mischievous smile on his lips. The journey to Atlanta lasted just over 2 hours. During the drive, Silas observed the landscape gradually change, farms giving way to small towns, which in turn grew until they transformed into the skyscrapers of the state capital. It was like watching his own life's trajectory in the form of geography. "We've arrived, Mr. Armstrong," Julian announced, parking near an imposing glass and concrete building in the city's financial district. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No, my friend. I need to do this alone. Go back to the hotel and wait for me there. This might take a while." As he got out of the car, Silas adjusted his straw hat and took a deep breath. In front of him, Horizon Bank displayed its modern facade with the slogan, "Your future starts here," in golden letters. Ironic, he thought, considering that much of that future belonged to him. Upon entering the building, he immediately felt curious and, in some cases, disapproving glances. His simple clothes completely clashed with the sophisticated environment. Executives in suits, elegant secretaries, and well-dressed clients circulated through the main lobby. Silas walked calmly to the information desk. "Good morning, young lady. I'd like to speak with someone about a transfer," he said with his distinct rural accent. The receptionist, A young woman with perfectly styled hair and impeccable makeup looked him up and down before replying. "Simple transfers are at the ATM, sir. It's over there in the corner." She pointed to a row of machines on the other side of the lobby. "Actually, it's a high-value transfer. I need to speak with a manager." The receptionist's expression subtly changed, mixing surprise and disbelief. After a few seconds of hesitation, she picked up the phone. "Amanda, there's a gentleman here wanting to talk about a high-value transfer. Can you see him?" Her voice conveyed a certain disdain. Moments later, a woman of approximately 35 years old, dressed in an elegant navy blue women's suit, approached with a commercial smile on her lips. Her high heels echoed on the marble floor. "Good morning, sir. I'm Amanda Rivers, Relationship Manager. How can I help you?" "I want to transfer $5 million from an overseas account here," Silas replied calmly, as if he were talking about the weather. Amanda's smile wavered for an instant, but she quickly recomposed it, albeit with a hint of disbelief in her eyes. "Well, this type of operation requires specific documentation and is normally handled by our private banking department." "Are you already a client of Horizon Bank?" "More or less," Silas replied enigmatically. "I've had business with you for many years, but I've never personally visited this branch." Amanda began to suspect she was facing some kind of prank or, even worse, some elaborate scam. "I understand. Well, we'll need to verify your documents and validate your identity before any procedure. Could you please accompany me to my desk, please?" Silas followed Amanda to a more private area, aware of the whispers and glances he left behind. As he passed the teller section, he noticed how the employees exchanged glances and smiled discreetly. He also noticed a young intern who, unlike the others, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "What is your full name, sir?" Amanda asked after indicating for Silas to sit down. "Silas Robert Armstrong." Amanda typed the name into the system, expecting to find little to no relevant information. Her fingers stopped typing abruptly when the first results began to appear on the screen. Her face paled slightly. "One moment, Mr. Armstrong. I'll need to verify some additional information." She picked up the phone and dialed an internal number, turning slightly to the side and lowering her voice. "Paul Henderson, we have a situation here. Can you come to my desk? It's urgent." On the other side of the bank, Paul Henderson, the regional manager, was finishing a meeting with investors. Tall, impeccably dressed, and with a posture that exuded authority, he was known for his ambition and for treating clients according to the size of their accounts. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I have an urgent matter to resolve. We'll continue shortly." As Paul Henderson approached, Silas observed the bank's activity, absorbing every detail, every interaction, every glance. He was there not just as a client, but as a silent observer of an organizational culture he had helped finance, but had never personally experienced. The clock struck 10:30 a.m. when the regional manager finally arrived at Amanda's desk. The day at Horizon Bank was just beginning, and no one there imagined how the next few hours would forever transform the institution. Paul Henderson approached with firm steps and the confidence of someone who commanded that territory. His eyes quickly scanned Silas, cataloguing every detail: the calloused hands, the straw hat worn at the edges, the plaid shirt faded from so much use. He immediately concluded that he was facing an ordinary man, perhaps a farmer, who had sold a piece of land and now needed guidance on how to handle a value outside his daily reality. "Good morning, sir. Paul Henderson, Regional Manager of Horizon Bank," he introduced himself, extending his hand with a rehearsed smile. "Amanda informed me that you wish to make a large transfer. We are here to help you, but we need to follow certain security protocols. Do you understand?" Silas shook the manager's hand firmly. "I understand perfectly. Security is fundamental these days." Paul Henderson sat at the table next to Amanda, who remained visibly tense. He opened a folder and began to take out forms. "Let's start with the basic documentation. I need your ID, social security number, proof of residence, and of course documents proving the origin of this money. International transfers, especially of significant amounts, are rigorously monitored by the central bank." Silas took a time-worn leather wallet from his shirt pocket. From inside it, he took out his personal documents. "As for the origin of the money, these are dividends from international investments." "I have everything documented, naturally." Paul Henderson typed the document numbers into the system, maintaining a neutral expression despite his growing curiosity. Silas Robert Armstrong was not a name that sounded familiar to him in the restricted circle of major investors he knew. "And you said you've had business with the bank for years. Could you specify more?" he asked, while waiting for the system to process the information. "Let's just say I have a deep relationship with this institution," Silas replied with a slight smile at the corner of his lips. Suddenly, Paul Henderson's expression changed drastically. His eyes widened as he read the information that appeared on the computer screen. The system had finally connected the name to his position in the company. The special access code that appeared in the corner of the screen indicated a client level that very few employees ever witnessed. "Mr. Armstrong," his voice now trembled slightly, "was there a problem with the personalized service department? You should have been directed immediately to our VIP lounge. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience." "There was no problem at all," Silas replied calmly. "I preferred to come this way without prior notice. I wanted to see how our institution's regular service operates." Paul Henderson swallowed hard upon hearing the word "our." The realization hit him like lightning. He was facing the bank's majority shareholder, the man whose signature appeared on annual reports, the name mentioned with reverence in board meetings. And he had appeared dressed as a simple countryman without any warning. "Mr. Armstrong, it's an immense honor to meet you personally." Paul Henderson stood up, almost knocking over his chair. "Please allow me to escort you to our executive meeting room, where we can discuss your transfer with more comfort and privacy." Amanda watched the scene astonished, connecting the dots. Her face alternated between shades of red and white as she processed the fact that she had condescendingly treated the owner of the bank where she worked. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Henderson," Silas said. "I prefer to stay right here. Ms. Rivers was serving me very well." The irony did not go unnoticed. Amanda lowered her gaze, aware that her initial service had been far from ideal. "As you prefer, sir," Paul Henderson replied, visibly uncomfortable. "May I offer you some coffee? Water, anything?" "A glass of water would be great, thank you." Paul Henderson made a frantic gesture to a nearby employee, who immediately ran to fulfill the request. In the main lobby, the news began to spread in urgent whispers. "The man in the straw hat. They say he owns the bank. Mr. Armstrong himself." The young intern whom Silas had noticed earlier timidly approached, bringing a glass of water on a tray. "Here is your water, sir," she said with a genuine smile, different from the rehearsed smiles that predominated in that environment. "Thank you, young lady." "What is your name?" Silas asked. "Caroline, sir. Caroline Sanders." "I've been an intern for 2 months. And are you enjoying the work, Caroline?" The question caught the young woman by surprise. Rarely did anyone in that position care about the opinion of a simple intern. "Yes, sir." "I'm learning a lot," she replied sincerely, although her gaze revealed that there was more to be said. "That's good. Perhaps we can talk later," Silas said, observing how Paul Henderson seemed increasingly anxious about the interaction. "Of course, Mr. Armstrong, it would be a pleasure," Caroline replied, discreetly stepping away. Paul Henderson regained control of the situation, although his tone was now completely different. "So, regarding your transfer, Mr. Armstrong, 5 million, correct? I can assure you that we will handle this with the utmost priority and security." "Actually," Silas said, leaning back in his chair, "before we talk about the transfer, I'd like to better understand how customer service works at this branch, especially for people who arrive here without the attire that seems to be expected." The comment made Paul Henderson shift uncomfortably in his chair. Amanda, still present, seemed to want to disappear. "Mr. Armstrong, I assure you that we treat all clients with the same respect and dedication, regardless of their appearance," Paul Henderson affirmed, although his voice betrayed his insecurity. "Is that so? Then why did I notice so many strange glances and mocking smiles since I entered here? Why was I initially directed to an ATM when I mentioned a transfer?" The silence that followed was deafening. Paul Henderson opened his mouth several times, but the words seemed to escape him. "I'll be frank with you, Paul Henderson," Silas continued. "I've been receiving worrying reports about the treatment given to less privileged clients in our branches. But reports are just numbers and words. I decided to see with my own eyes, to experience it firsthand, and what I've seen so far confirms my concerns." Mr. Armstrong, if there was any misunderstanding or inappropriate treatment, I take full responsibility and apologize on behalf of the entire team, Paul Henderson replied, feeling cold sweat running down his back. I'm not looking for excuses. Mr. Henderson, I'm looking for changes. At that moment, as if to worsen the situation, 2 security guards discreetly approached, positioning themselves strategically near the table. Paul Henderson made a subtle gesture, indicating that everything was under control, but Silas noticed the movement. Are the security guards for my protection, or to ensure I don't cause problems? He asked with a calm but firm tone. Mr. Armstrong by no means had Paul Henderson began, but was interrupted. Mr. Henderson, I worked in the fields for many years. I learned that you don't judge the quality of the land just by looking at it from afar. You have to take a handful, feel its texture, check its moisture. The same applies to a company. You don't know its true nature just by brilliant reports and impeccable presentations. You have to experience it as a client, as an employee, as an ordinary person. Paul Henderson nodded, swallowing hard. His phone began to ring insistently. Probably the board had already been informed of Silas's unusual presence at the branch. Excuse me, Mr. Armstrong, I need to take this call. Go ahead, Silas replied, taking the opportunity to observe the activity around him. He noticed how employees tried to disguise their curiosity, how clients who had previously looked at him with disdain now seemed intrigued, how the entire dynamic of the branch seemed to have changed with the simple revelation of his identity. Caroline, the intern, continued her work diligently, although she cast occasional glances in Silas's direction. There was something different about her, an authenticity that contrasted with the artificial environment of the bank. Paul Henderson returned visibly shaken. Mr. Armstrong, the chairman of the board is on his way. He insists on receiving you personally. Richard is coming here? So all this fuss wasn't necessary, Silas commented, revealing his familiarity with the chairman of the board, which seemed to further increase Paul Henderson's nervousness. He insisted, sir. He said it's been a long time since he's seen you personally. Silas smiled. True, since my daughter Louise's graduation, if I'm not mistaken. Good times. Silas's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Louise. So, Dad, how's the surprise inspection going? Silas typed quickly. More revealing than I imagined, daughter. I think I made the right decision to come personally. As he put away his phone, Silas noticed a group of executives hurrying across the bank's main lobby. At the forefront, a tall man with grey hair and an elegant posture, Richard Allen, chairman of the board of Horizon Bank and an old friend of Silas. The expressions of the employees observing the scene fluctuated between surprise, curiosity, and in some cases apprehension. That simple man, who moments before had been the target of depreciative glances, was now the center of attention, receiving the treatment usually reserved only for the most important figures in the financial world. The question that hung in the air, reflected in the restless glances that crossed throughout the branch, was, what would happen next? Richard Allen made his way through the astonished employees, his broad smile contrasting with the tension that dominated the environment. Unlike the other executives who seemed disturbed by the unusual situation, Richard showed genuine joy at seeing his old friend. Silas, you old fox, he exclaimed, opening his arms for a warm embrace, completely ignoring the formal protocols so valued in that corporate environment. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? We would have prepared a proper reception. Silas stood up and returned the embrace with equal enthusiasm. Han missed the chance to see how things really work around here. You know me, Richard. I've always preferred the unvarnished truth. The two men represented seemingly opposite worlds, Richard with his impeccable Italian suit and Silas with his simple country clothes. However, the mutual respect between them was palpable and disconcerting for those watching the scene. Let's go to my office, Richard suggested. We can catch up with more privacy. If you don't mind, I prefer to stay right here, Silas replied, sitting down again. I haven't finished my field research yet. Richard immediately understood his friend's intention and nodded, taking a seat beside him. Paul Henderson remained standing, visibly uncomfortable, while Amanda had discreetly moved away, seeking refuge at her own desk, a few meters ahead. Paul Henderson was telling me about the branch's service procedures, Silas commented casually. Richard cast a penetrating glance at the regional manager. I imagine it was quite an Educational explanation. Quite so, Silas agreed. Especially the non-verbal part. Paul Henderson swallowed hard. Mr. Armstrong, as I said earlier, if there was any misunderstanding, there was no misunderstanding at all, Mr. Henderson, Silas interrupted, his tone now firmer. What happened was a clear demonstration of something I had suspected for a long time. Our institution, which should serve all Americans with equal respect, has become a space of exclusion and prejudice. Richard sighed deeply. Silas, you've always been direct. That's why you got where you are. And that's why I cannot ignore what I saw today, Silas replied, observing the activity around him. When I invested in this bank, Richard, I shared my vision with you. To create an institution that could be a bridge, not a barrier, that would welcome both the executive and the rural worker, that would be accessible to the factory owner and the laborer. From what I saw today, we have failed miserably. Silas's words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Paul Henderson seemed increasingly pale, while Richard surprisingly maintained a serene expression. We haven't failed yet, my friend, Richard finally replied. We've identified a problem. Now we can correct it. At that moment, Caroline, the young intern, timidly approached, holding a folder. Excuse me, gentlemen. Sorry for the interruption, but I thought this might be useful for the conversation. She extended the folder to Silas. Paul Henderson seemed about to intervene, but Richard made a subtle gesture, allowing the young woman to proceed. What is this, Caroline? Silas asked, accepting the folder. These are data I've been collecting over the past few months, sir, about service standards, waiting times, and service approval according to client profile. Silas opened the folder and began to examine the documents, meticulously crafted graphs, detailed tables, and precise notes that demonstrated glaring disparities in the treatment offered to different client profiles. Is this part of your job as an intern? Richard asked, intrigued. Actually, no, sir, Caroline replied, a slight tremor in her voice. It's a personal project. I noticed certain inconsistencies in service and decided to document them. I thought about presenting them at the next team meeting, but I never found the right opportunity. Silas looked at the young woman with growing admiration. And what motivated you to do this, Caroline? The young woman hesitated for a moment before replying, My grandmother, sir. She's a seamstress. She's worked her whole life. When she came to the bank to open a savings account, she was treated as if she were asking for a favor. It took 3 hours for her to be seen, while I saw well-dressed people being welcomed immediately. That deeply bothered me. A significant silence followed Caroline's words. Paul Henderson seemed to want to say something, but held back, aware of the fragility of his position. Caroline, Silas finally said, do you have more copies of this material? Yes, sir. I keep everything digitized as well. Excellent, because this folder now belongs to the board of directors. Silas passed the material to Richard, who received it with seriousness. Ms. Sanders, Paul Henderson intervened, partially regaining his composure. Perhaps we should discuss this unauthorized project in private. Using bank resources for personal investigations constitutes a protocol violation. The only protocol violated here, Mr. Henderson, Silas replied before Caroline could defend herself, was that of treating all clients with dignity. And as for the resources used, consider them retroactively authorized by me. Richard leafed through the documents with growing interest. Impressive, truly impressive. Paul Henderson, were you aware of these disparities? The regional manager hesitated, caught between the uncomfortable truth and a dangerous lie. We have service metrics, naturally, but we never analyzed them from this specific perspective. Well, we should have analyzed them, Silas commented. It's precisely this kind of data that reveals the true face of an institution. Richard closed the folder and faced his friend. What do you suggest, Silas? I know that look. You didn't just come to observe. Silas smiled slightly. You know me too well, Richard. He stood up and walked a few steps, observing the activity of the branch, which now operated in a surreal atmosphere of tension and curiosity. First, I want to get to know this place better. Then we'll talk about changes. Changes. Paul Henderson couldn't hide his apprehension. Yes, Mr. Henderson, deep and necessary changes. Silas turned to Caroline. Would you accompany me on a tour of the branch, Ms. Sanders? I'd like to get to know the bank from the perspective of someone who truly cares about people. It would be an honor, "Mr. Armstrong?" Caroline replied, still stunned by the events. As Silas and Caroline walked away, Paul Henderson leaned towards Richard. "Mr. Allen, should I be concerned?" Richard observed his old friend walking through the bank, greeting surprised employees, talking to clients intrigued by that unusual figure. "Paul Henderson, when I met Silas over 30 years ago, he was just a small rural producer trying to get financing to expand his plantation. I was the only banker who believed in him. All the others saw only a country bumpkin without formal education. Do you know what I learned that day?" Paul Henderson waited in silence. "I learned that appearances not only deceive, they can cost billions in opportunities. That country bumpkin multiplied the initial investment by 1,000 in less than a decade, and never in all these years has he changed his essence. If there's one thing Silas detests, it's falsehood. So yes, Paul Henderson, you should be concerned. Not about your job, but about the kind of environment you helped create in this bank." On the other side of the branch, Silas was talking to employees from the operational sector, those who rarely had contact with senior management. Caroline watched admiringly as he showed genuine interest in each person's stories and experiences, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. "And you, Charles, how long have you worked here?" Silas asked a young man who was operating the teller window. 8 years, Mr. Armstrong. I started as an office boy." "And how is the treatment of simpler clients? Those who come here to receive retirement benefits, Social Security?" Charles hesitated, casting a nervous glance in the direction of Paul Henderson, who was observing the scene from a distance. "You can speak freely," Silas assured him. "I'm here to hear the truth, not pretty stories." "Well, sir, we have guidelines to expedite service for premium clients. The others have to wait in the regular line. On benefit payment days, seniors sometimes wait 3-4 hours. Silas nodded, mentally noting another item on his growing list of concerns. "And does that seem fair to you, Charles?" The young teller looked Silas directly in the eyes. "No, sir, it never seemed fair to me. My own grandmother goes through this at another bank, but no one ever asked my opinion before." As the visit continued, Silas accumulated similar stories. Employees uncomfortable with discriminatory practices, simpler clients relegated to second-class service, a system that, although efficient in numbers, proved to be profoundly inhumane in practice. Caroline, who was following everything closely, seemed increasingly hopeful. "You really care, don't you?" "It's not just a formal visit." Silas smiled at the young woman. "My daughter, I got where I am because I never forgot where I came from. Wealth has no value if it cannot be used to improve people's lives, and this bank, which carries my investment and my trust, should reflect those values." Silas's cell phone vibrated again. It was another message from Louise. "Dad, I just spoke with Richard. He said you're turning the bank upside down. Do you need reinforcements?" Silas replied, "Not yet, daughter, but get ready. Tomorrow we'll have a lot of work to do." As he put away his phone, Silas noticed that a small group of executives had formed near the meeting room. Among them, Paul Henderson gestured emphatically, like someone trying to explain a complicated situation. "It seems not everyone is happy with my visit," Silas commented to Caroline. "Some managers are concerned about changes, sir. Changes usually mean performance evaluations, possible cuts." "I understand the fear," Silas replied, "but sometimes fear is necessary to provoke reflection, and reflection is the first step towards true change." When they returned to the central area of the branch, Richard was waiting with a serious expression. "Finished your tour, Silas?" "For now, yes. And I confirmed what I suspected. We have a lot of work ahead of us, my friend." Richard nodded. "The board is meeting in an emergency video conference. They would like to hear from you." "Let's go then," Silas agreed. Before following Richard, he turned to Caroline. "Thank you for your honesty and courage, Miss Sanders. This bank needs more people like you." The young intern smiled, moved. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Armstrong. It made more of a difference than you imagine." As Silas and Richard headed to the meeting room, the employees and clients of the branch remained in a state of palpable anticipation. Something significant was happening, something that everyone instinctively felt would forever change the culture of that institution. In the meeting room, a large monitor displayed the apprehensive faces of the members of the Horizon Bank's board of directors. Paul Henderson was asked to leave, leaving only Silas, Richard, and the virtual board members in that crucial conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas began, naturally taking command of the meeting, "I have a story to tell and some important decisions to share with you." The sun was already setting when Silas finally left the Horizon Bank branch. The meeting with the board of directors had extended for over 3 hours, marked by heated discussions, specific resistances, and finally, a reluctant consensus. As he left the imposing building, Silas found Julian waiting patiently in the truck. "So, boss, how was it?" the driver asked, noticing his friend's thoughtful expression. "Revealing, Julian." "Painfully revealing," Silas replied, settling into the passenger seat. "But productive. Very productive." As the truck drove away from Atlanta's financial district, Silas watched the city lights begin to turn on. His cell phone rang. It was Louise. "Dad, Richard just called me. He said you turned the tables at the board meeting." "What happened?" Silas smiled upon hearing his daughter's voice. "Let's just say I presented a very clear choice to the board. Either go along with the changes I proposed, or find another majority shareholder." "You didn't do that," Louise exclaimed between shock and admiration. "Yes, I did, daughter. Some situations demand firm stances. What I saw today was not just an oversight or a specific service failure. It was the reflection of a sick organizational culture that needs to be cured at its root." And what was the reaction? As expected, first denial, then indignation, followed by bargaining and finally reluctant acceptance. "I will formally present the transformation plan tomorrow in an extraordinary meeting. I want you by my side, as the project's legal director." On the other end of the line, Louise couldn't contain her surprise. "Me? But Dad, I have commitments at the office and—" "Nothing is more important than this, daughter. Besides, you always said you wanted to work more directly with social issues. Here's your chance." There was a moment of silence followed by Louise's determined reply. "I'll be on the first flight to Atlanta tomorrow morning." "Great. Oh, and Louise, bring that report you prepared on inclusive banking. I think we finally found the right place to implement it." After hanging up, Silas realized that Julian had deviated from the hotel route. "Where are we going, Julian?" "Excuse the liberty, boss, but I thought after a day like this, you might want to visit a special place before returning to the hotel." Intrigued, Silas watched through the truck windows as they left the luxurious downtown and entered a more humble part of the city. After a few minutes, Julian parked in front of a small establishment with a faded sign, "Tony's Tavern since 1978. "What place is this, Julian?" The driver smiled. "The place where you signed your first big contract, boss. Don't you remember? It was here you closed the deal with Mr. John Miller, over 30 years ago. The bar is still the same, only Tony is older." The memory hit Silas like a wave. Of course he remembered. John Miller, a local merchant who was the first to believe in his potential and invest in his small agricultural production. The contract had been signed in that very bar, at a simple wooden table with a beer to seal the deal. It was the first significant step in the trajectory that would lead him to the position he held today. "Julian, you're incredible. How did you remember this place? There's Karidi Haishu and some things you don't forget, boss. And I thought you needed to remember where it all began, especially today." With a lump in his throat, Silas got out of the truck and entered the bar. The atmosphere was simple, welcoming, full of life. Wooden tables occupied by workers ending their shift, the smell of homemade snacks in the air, lively conversations at a comfortably loud volume. "I can't believe my eyes," a hoarse, aged but still strong voice sounded from behind the counter. Silas Armstrong himself, Tony, now an old man with completely white hair and a face marked by time, approached with open arms. Despite the years, his smile remained the same, genuine and welcoming. "Tony, long time no see, my friend." Silas hugged the old acquaintance with genuine joy. "A good 15 years at least. Since that time you came with John just before he—" "Well, you know." Silas nodded, fondly remembering his first investor, who had passed away over a decade ago. "Table as usual?" Tony asked, already leading Silas and Julian to a table in the corner of the establishment, the same one where, so many years ago, a simple contract had changed the destiny of a young farmer. "Nothing's changed here," Silas commented, looking around with nostalgia. "Why would it change? It's been working for almost 50 years, Tony replied simply. "The secret is to treat everyone equally, whether they're a bricklayer or a doctor. In here, everyone is just people. The old bar owner's words resonated deeply with Silas, reinforcing his convictions about the changes he intended to implement at the bank. While Silas revisited his roots in that simple bar, on the other side of the city, Horizon Bank was still buzzing with the day's events. Extraordinary meetings were taking place in various departments, and Silas Armstrong's name was whispered in every corridor. Paul Henderson remained in his office, his face heavy with concern as he analyzed his situation. After Silas's departure, Richard had been clear. Significant changes were coming, and those who did not adapt would be left behind. A soft knock on his door interrupted his dark thoughts. It was Amanda, the relationship manager who had initially served Silas. "May I come in, Paul Henderson?" "Of course, Amanda. Any news?" The woman seemed nervous as she sat in the chair in front of her superior's desk. "Actually, yes. I just received an email from the presidency. I've been summoned to a meeting tomorrow morning with Mr. Armstrong and his team. Were you also called?" Paul Henderson nodded slowly. "Yes, I received the same notice. Apparently we'll be the first to learn about this transformation plan. What do you think will happen to us?" Amanda's voice trembled slightly. Paul Henderson sighed deeply before replying, "Honestly, I don't know. But one thing is certain. Nothing will be as it was after tomorrow." Elsewhere in the branch, Caroline, the young intern, had also received an unexpected email. A summons to the same meeting, personally signed by Silas Armstrong. With a racing heart, she reread the message several times to make sure there was no mistake. The bank owner wanted her presence at the meeting that would define the institution's future. Her phone rang. It was her grandmother. "Hi, Grandma, how are you?" "Everything's great, my dear. I just called to see how your day was. You left home so excited this morning." Caroline smiled, thinking about how impossible it would be to summarize everything that had happened on that extraordinary day. "It was an incredible day, Grandma. Unbelievable, actually. I'll tell you all about it calmly tomorrow, I promise. But I can tell you one thing. I think I'll finally be able to help change that situation you went through at the bank." On the other end of the line, the elderly woman's voice showed curiosity. "Really? And how are you going to do that, my granddaughter?" "It's not me who's going to do it, Grandma. It's the bank owner himself. And for some reason I don't fully understand yet, he wants my help." The next morning, Horizon Bank dawned differently. Rumors about Silas's visit had spread quickly, and an atmosphere of anticipation hung in the air. Employees arrived earlier, exchanging theories about what was to come. Some feared for their jobs, others envisioned opportunities for change. In the main meeting room, Richard Allen personally organized the final details. The clock struck 7:30 a.m. when the elevator doors opened, revealing Silas, now dressed in a simple but elegant suit, accompanied by Louise, a woman of approximately 35 years old, whose confident posture and keen gaze revealed much about her personality. "Good morning." "Richard," Silas greeted, hugging his friend. "This is my daughter, Louise." "I finally meet the famous lawyer," Richard replied, shaking Louise's hand respectfully. "Your father talks a lot about you." "The pleasure is mine." "Mr. Allen, my father also talks a lot about you, usually good things," Louise replied with a discreet smile. While the three conversed, other meeting participants began to arrive. Directors from different departments, board representatives, and finally Paul Henderson, Amanda, and Caroline, the latter visibly nervous amidst so many high-ranking executives. Upon seeing Caroline, Silas approached, extending his hand. "Good morning, Miss Sanders. I'm glad you accepted my invitation." "Good morning, Mr. Armstrong. I confess I'm a little nervous." "There's no reason to be nervous. You are here because you demonstrated something that many in this room seem to have forgotten. Empathy and commitment to people, not just numbers." At 8 a.m. sharp, Richard began the meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you all must already be aware, yesterday we received the unexpected but extremely timely visit of our majority shareholder, Silas Armstrong. This visit revealed aspects of our operation that urgently need to be reviewed. Therefore, I convened this extraordinary meeting, in which Mr. Armstrong will personally present his transformation plan for Horizon Bank." Richard gestured, passing the floor to Silas, who calmly stood up. The silence in the room was absolute. "Good morning, everyone. Before presenting the plan, I'd like to tell a short personal story. When I was 15, my father became gravely ill. We needed money for treatment, and I, as the eldest son, went to several banks trying to get a loan, using our small property as collateral. In all of them, I was treated with disdain. Some managers didn't even receive me. Until at a small community bank, a young manager named Anthony not only received me, but listened to me with attention and respect. Silas paused, his eyes scanning the attentive faces around him. That manager not only approved my loan, but also taught me basic financial management concepts, which were fundamental for me to pay for my father's treatment and eventually prosper. Years later, when I had already achieved some success, I sought out Anthony to thank him. Do you know what he told me? I didn't do anything special. I just treated you as I would like to be treated. Louise watched her father with pride, while Richard nodded as if he already knew that story and its meaning. Ladies and gentlemen, Horizon Bank was founded with a clear mission: to be a financial institution that serves all Americans with equal respect and dignity. Yesterday I observed that we have dramatically strayed from that mission, and today I am here to guide you back to it. With a gesture, Silas indicated to Louise to distribute copies of a document titled Horizon Project for All. As the folders were handed out, expressions of surprise and, in some cases, consternation began to emerge. What you hold in your hands is more than a business plan. It is a commitment to transformation. Starting today, Horizon Bank embarks on a journey of deep renewal, which will affect all aspects of our operation, from customer service to our hiring policy, through a complete review of our organizational culture. A tense silence dominated the room as those present leafed through the document presented by Silas. The Horizon Project for All was not just a reformulation of guidelines or specific adjustments. It was a complete reinvention of the financial institution, touching on sensitive points and challenging long-established practices. Paul Henderson was the first to break the silence, his tone oscillating between incredulity and concern. Mr. Armstrong, with all due respect, this is revolutionary. Eliminating client segmentation by income, completely redesigning the queuing system, creating a microcredit program without requiring traditional collateral. I fear we are moving away from the model that has brought us success until now. Silas smiled serenely before replying. And what exactly is your definition of success, Mr. Henderson? Profit at any cost, or a financial institution that, besides being profitable, fulfills its social role and treats all clients with dignity? Before Paul Henderson could reply, Martha Caldwell, the bank's financial director, intervened. Mr. Armstrong, no one here questions the nobility of your intentions, but we have to consider the financial impact of these changes. Our shareholders expect consistent results. Louise, who until then had been silently observing, decided to enter the debate. Director Caldwell, if I may, we have carefully analyzed the financial impact of each proposed measure. On page 47 of the document, we present detailed projections that demonstrate how, after an initial adaptation period, the bank will not only maintain its profitability, but may significantly increase it. How is that possible? Another director questioned. We are talking about investing in traditionally less profitable segments. Precisely because of that, Louise replied confidently. We are talking about a blue ocean, a market practically unexplored by large banks. While all financial institutions compete for the same high-income clients, there is a huge population lacking adequate banking services. Furthermore, our studies indicate that well-served clients, regardless of their social class, tend to develop greater loyalty to the institution. Caroline watched the exchange of arguments with fascination. It was like watching a high-level chess game, where every move was carefully calculated. If you'll allow me, Richard intervened. I'd like to remind everyone that this is not a proposal open to a vote. Mr. Armstrong, as the majority shareholder, has full power to implement these changes. This meeting is for informational and consultative purposes. Richard's declaration made Paul Henderson straighten in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. In that case, what exactly is our role in this process? Silas resumed speaking. Your role, ladies and gentlemen, is to decide whether you wish to be part of this transformation or not. I am not imposing anything on anyone. I am offering a choice. Those who believe in this new vision and wish to contribute to making it a reality will be most welcome. Those who prefer to follow other paths will have my full respect and support for a dignified transition." These words caused a murmur in the room. It wasn't an explicit ultimatum, but the message was clear. Horizon Bank was changing course, and those who didn't adapt would be left behind. After almost 2 hours of intense discussion, where every aspect of the plan was meticulously debated, Silas concluded the meeting with an unexpected announcement. To implement this project with the necessary agility and commitment, I am creating a special task force that will report directly to me. My daughter, Louise Armstrong, will be the general coordinator, and I would like to invite Ms. Caroline Sanders to join the team as a representative of frontline employees. The surprise was general, especially for Caroline, who turned pale upon hearing her name. Several directors exchanged astonished glances. An intern being elevated to such a significant position was unprecedented in the bank's history. "Mr. Armstrong," Paul Henderson said, unable to contain his indignation, "with all due respect, Mrs. Sanders is just an intern, without management experience or deep knowledge of our processes." "Precisely why she is perfect for the role," Silas interrupted. "Miss Sanders is not contaminated by the culture we intend to transform. Furthermore, she demonstrated something that many experienced executives seem to have forgotten: the ability to observe real problems and seek effective solutions, even without formal authority to do so." Richard, perceiving the growing tension, formally concluded the meeting. "I thank everyone for their presence. Mr. Armstrong and his team will be available for individual conversations throughout the day. The next steps will be communicated later this week." As the participants dispersed, some visibly concerned, others intrigued by the possibilities opening up, Caroline remained seated, still processing what had just happened. "Ms. Sanders, may we speak in private?" Louise's voice brought Caroline back to reality. "Of course, Dr. Armstrong," Louise smiled. "Please call me Louise. From what my father told me, you and I have a lot in common, especially our concern for the humanization of financial services." The two women headed to a smaller room, adjacent to the meeting room. There, Louise explained in detail the role Caroline would play in the task force and how her perspective would be fundamental to ensure that the proposed changes truly met the needs of frontline clients and employees. "But why me?" Caroline finally asked. "There are much more experienced employees." "Experience is not always synonymous with vision, Caroline. My father saw something rare in you. The ability to see what is wrong and the courage to try to change it, even when there's no guarantee of success. That's exactly what we need now." Outside the room, Paul Henderson walked hurriedly down the corridor, followed closely by Amanda and 2 other managers. "This is absurd," he murmured, barely containing his frustration. Decades of experience in the financial market being ignored in favor of impractical idealisms. "Darcy, what are we going to do?" Amanda asked, her voice betraying genuine concern. Paul Henderson stopped abruptly, looking around to ensure he wouldn't be overheard. "We won't accept this passively. We have allies on the board. We have data that can show the risks of these radical changes. We'll meet tonight, at my house. We need to devise a strategy." Meanwhile, in the president's office, Silas was talking with Richard about the next steps. The mood between the old friends was one of cautious optimism. "You caused a real earthquake, Silas," Richard commented. "Some won't accept it easily." "I never expected it to be easy, Richard. True transformations never are. But I'm prepared for resistance." "Paul Henderson will certainly lead the opposition," Richard observed. "He has a lot to lose with these changes." Silas nodded thoughtfully. "He will have the opportunity to adapt like everyone else. But if he chooses confrontation, I'm ready for that too." The rest of the day unfolded in a climate of intense activity. Silas and Louise conducted a series of individual meetings with key directors, seeking to identify allies for the transformation project. Caroline, now officially integrated into the task force, was tasked with preparing a detailed report on the client experience in the branches, with emphasis on the most problematic areas. At the end of the afternoon, as Silas was preparing to return to the hotel, he received an unexpected call from George Miller, one of the most influential members of the board of directors. "Silas, we need to talk," George said without mincing words. I'm on my way to Atlanta. Can we have dinner together tonight? Of course, George. Something specific in mind? Several board members are concerned about the direction things are taking. I prefer to discuss it in person. After hanging up, Silas shared the content of the conversation with Louise, who had just entered his office. The organized backlash has begun, she commented. Sooner than I expected. It was inevitable, Silas replied calmly. The system always defends itself when threatened. But we are prepared, aren't we? More than they imagined, Dad, Louise replied with a confident smile. That night, in an elegant restaurant in downtown Atlanta, Silas met with George Miller. The board member, a man in his 60s with perfectly combed grey hair and an impeccable suit, seemed tense despite his attempt to maintain a relaxed appearance. Silas, I'll get straight to the point, George said after the initial greetings. Several members of the board are seriously concerned about the plan you presented. It's not just about the changes themselves, but about how they are being conducted. Creating a task force that reports only to you, putting your daughter as coordinator, promoting an intern without consulting normal hierarchical channels. All of this is being seen as a kind of authoritarian intervention. Silas listened attentively, sipping his wine as George explained the board's concerns. George, how long have you known me? 15, 20 years? Almost 25, actually. And throughout all that time, have you ever seen me make decisions on a whim or without carefully considering the consequences? George hesitated before replying, No, never. Your prudence has always been one of your most admirable characteristics. So why would it be different now? Silas leaned forward. What I saw yesterday at the bank was not just a casual deviation from our principles, it was evidence of a deeply distorted organizational culture. And distorted cultures are not corrected with timid or gradual measures. I understand your point, Silas, but there are more diplomatic ways to implement changes. Diplomacy has its place, George, but sometimes it's necessary to be surgical, quick and precise to avoid greater damage. The conversation continued for almost 2 hours, oscillating between discussions about the technical aspects of the plan and broader reflections on the social responsibility of financial institutions. In the end, although not completely convinced, George seemed more receptive to Silas's ideas. I cannot promise the unanimous support of the board, Silas, but I will take your arguments seriously. That's all I ask, George, a fair judgment, based on the merits of the plan, not on fears or resistance to change. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a very different meeting was taking place at Paul Henderson's residence. 8 people, including senior managers, directors, and 2 board members, discussed strategies to contain what they called the Armstrong threat. He may be the majority shareholder, but he can't simply ignore decades of established practices and impose his personal vision, Paul Henderson argued, pacing nervously around the room. We have procedures, we have policies approved by the board itself. The problem is that he has the legal backing to do exactly that, Amanda pondered, who seemed increasingly less convinced of the need for resistance. Legal, yes, but what about the practical backing? Paul Henderson retorted. Who will implement these changes? Us, the managers, the directors, the frontline employees. What if we show that these ideas are impractical in the real world? Are you suggesting sabotage? Asked one of those present, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I'm suggesting realism, Paul Henderson replied. We will implement the plan exactly as it is on paper, without adaptations or improvements based on our experience. When problems start to arise, and they will, we'll have concrete data to show that these ideas, although well-intentioned, are impractical. The strategy proposed by Paul Henderson generated a heated debate among those present. Some supported the literal implementation approach, while others expressed concern about the ethical and practical consequences of such a strategy. Amanda, in particular, seemed increasingly distant from that veiled conspiracy. The next morning, Horizon Bank was abuzz with rumors about the announced changes. Employees at all levels sought information, speculated about impacts on their careers, and tried to strategically position themselves in the new scenario that was unfolding. Caroline arrived early, determined to immediately begin her work on the task force. To her surprise, she found her desk filled with messages and small gifts from colleagues, some genuinely happy for her ascent, Others clearly trying to curry favor in the new power arrangement. Popular all of a sudden, huh? Commented Robert, a fellow intern with a hint of poorly disguised envy. I didn't ask for any of this, Robert, Caroline replied, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Of course not. You were just in the right place at the right time, with the right dossier. Before Caroline could reply, Louise appeared, inviting her to the first official task force meeting. As she headed to the designated room, Caroline couldn't help but notice the glances that followed her, some admiring, others resentful, most simply curious. The meeting room was set up with a large interactive whiteboard, where Louise had begun to map out the project's main areas of intervention. Silas was already there, chatting animatedly with Richard and two other executives who had shown themselves favorable to the plan. Ah, Caroline. Welcome to the transformation team, Silas greeted warmly. Ready to turn the bank upside down? Before Caroline could reply, the door opened again, revealing an unexpected figure. Amanda Rivers. The relationship manager who had served Silas the day before seemed nervous, but determined. Mr. Armstrong, I know I wasn't invited, but I need to speak with you. It's important. Silas made a welcoming gesture. Come in, Amanda. We're always open to new voices. Thank you, she said, taking a deep breath before continuing. Last night there was a meeting at Paul Henderson's house. 8 people, including 2 board members. They are planning to sabotage your project. An astonished silence dominated the room after Amanda's revelation. All eyes turned to Silas, awaiting his reaction to the news of the forming conspiracy. To general surprise, a slight smile appeared on his lips. Thank you for the information, Amanda. Your honesty demonstrates character and commitment to the institution, not to individuals or hierarchies. You don't seem surprised, Amanda observed, confused by Silas's tranquility. And I'm not. Significant changes always meet resistance. It's part of the process. Silas stood up, walking to the interactive whiteboard. In fact, this information only confirms the urgency and necessity of what we are about to do. Richard, who was observing the scene attentively, intervened. Should we take any immediate action against those involved? None, Silas replied promptly, at least for now. We will give them the opportunity to reconsider their positions. Louise, knowing her father well, realized that his apparent tranquility hid a plan already in formation. You were expecting this, weren't you? Let's say I prepared for several possible scenarios, daughter. Organized resistance was one of them, although I expected a little more subtlety. Turning to Amanda, Silas asked, Could you detail exactly what was discussed in that meeting? Amanda hesitated for a moment, aware of the implications of her disclosure, but then nodded. Yes, I can. The main strategy is what Paul Henderson called literal implementation, following the plan to the letter, without adaptations or improvements, ensuring that all potential problems manifest themselves. Interesting, Silas commented. They intend to use our own initiative against us, exposing its weaknesses instead of contributing to its improvement. After a moment of reflection, he continued, Amanda, would you like to officially join our team? We will need someone who knows the current operation well and has the courage you demonstrated. The offer caught Amanda by surprise. It would be an honor, Mr. Armstrong. Excellent. Richard, could you arrange Amanda's immediate transfer to the task force? Richard nodded, making notes on his tablet. Consider it done. Silas then addressed the entire team. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just received the first concrete confirmation that our project is not only necessary, but urgent. What we face is not just natural resistance to change, but an ingrained culture of protecting privileges and exclusionary practices. Our mission now has crystal clarity, not just to transform processes and policies, but to rebuild the very ethical foundations of this institution. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with the team defining strategies to implement the proposed changes. Caroline, initially shy, surprised everyone with valuable insights into the real client experience. Amanda, in turn, proved to be an inexhaustible source of information about internal practices that needed to be reformulated. At the end of the day, Silas convened a general meeting with all employees of the branch. The large auditorium was packed, with hundreds of collaborators eager to hear directly from the majority shareholder what to expect in the coming days. Paul Henderson and his closest allies, positioned themselves strategically in the back rows, observing the preparations for the presentation with suspicion. At 5 p.m. sharp, Silas stepped onto the stage, accompanied by Louise, Richard, Caroline, Amanda, and the other members of the task force. The buzz immediately ceased, giving way to a silence charged with anticipation. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me yet, I am Silas Armstrong, farmer, businessman, and yes, the majority shareholder of this bank. His voice, firm and clear, echoed through the auditorium. But today I'm not here as an owner or investor. I am here as someone who deeply believes in the transformative power of financial institutions when placed at the service of people, all people. Silas then briefly narrated his experience from the previous day, omitting specific names, but making clear his disappointment with the discriminatory treatment observed. Horizon Bank was born from a dream, to create an institution that could be a bridge, not a barrier, that would welcome both the executive and the rural worker, that would be accessible to the entrepreneur and the street vendor. At some point along the way, we lost sight of that dream. Paul Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Silas continued. But today, at this very moment, we have the opportunity to reclaim our original purpose and go beyond. And that is what we will do. With the contribution of each one of you, from tellers to directors, from interns to managers. Louise then took the microphone, outlining the Horizon Project for all. With each slide, the mood in the audience oscillated between apprehension and enthusiasm. Some employees exchanged worried glances, others nodded with growing approval. Implementation will begin immediately, Louise announced, but it will be gradual and adaptive. We know that transformations of this magnitude require continuous adjustments, and we count on everyone's feedback in this process. Caroline was next to speak, her initially trembling voice gaining confidence with each word. As many of you know, I'm just an intern. I have been at this bank for less than 3 months, but in such a short time, I have observed both the best and the worst of our institution. I saw colleagues genuinely concerned about helping clients, regardless of their appearance or bank account. And I saw others who seemed to forget that behind every number there is a human being with dreams, needs, and dignity. The auditorium was in absolute silence, absorbing the words of that young woman who, until the previous day, was just another anonymous intern. I am on this team to represent your voice, of those on the front lines dealing directly with clients. Nothing will be imposed from top down, without considering the practical reality of those who perform the work daily. Amanda complimented, sharing her own journey of awareness. I confess that I myself was part of the problem. I internalized a culture of segmentation so deeply that I began to see people only as categories: premium, classic, basic. I forgot that behind every classification there is an individual who deserves respect. I'm here today not only as part of the solution, but as someone in a process of personal transformation. When Richard resumed the microphone for the final remarks, Paul Henderson stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, but I'd like to ask a question." Richard hesitated, looking at Silas, who nodded. "Go ahead." Paul Henderson. The regional manager walked slowly to the central aisle of the auditorium. All this talk about inclusion and equal treatment sounds very beautiful, truly inspiring. But let's be realistic. Banks are businesses, not charities. How exactly do you intend to maintain profitability by serving clients who, frankly, generate little to no financial return? A murmur ran through the auditorium. The question, although provocative, reflected a genuine doubt of many present. Silas calmly descended from the stage, walking until he stood face to face with Paul Henderson. "This is an excellent question, Paul Henderson, and I thank you for asking it openly instead of just discussing it in private meetings." The regional manager paled slightly, realizing the insinuation. "The answer is simple, but it requires a fundamental shift in perspective," Silas continued. "First, we need to abandon the short-term vision that dominates the financial market. When you label a client as unprofitable, you are usually considering only their immediate value, ignoring their future potential." Silas then shared a personal story. "When I started, I was considered a terrible client for any bank, a small farmer, with no credit history, requesting modest loans that generated little return for the institution. All traditional banks rejected me, except for a small community bank that saw beyond the present. Today, my company's financial transactions total billions annually. Imagine how many Silases we are ignoring daily in our branches. Paul Henderson had no answer to that. His expression oscillated between embarrassment and reflection. Furthermore, Louise intervened, our financial projections clearly demonstrate that responsible financial inclusion is not only sustainable, but potentially more profitable in the long term. We are talking about millions of Americans currently unbanked or underbanked who represent a practically untapped market. And it's not just about numbers, Silas added. It's about purpose. A company without purpose beyond profit is like a body without a soul. It can function for a while, but eventually loses its essence and reason for being. Silas's words had a visible impact not only on Paul Henderson, but on the entire audience. It was as if an invisible curtain had been lifted, allowing everyone to see a possibility that had always been there, but remained obscured by immediate pragmatism. I appreciate your question, Paul Henderson, and I extend the invitation. Join us in this transformation. Your experience and knowledge would be valuable, provided they are applied in service of this new purpose. All eyes turned to Paul Henderson, awaiting his response. After a moment of palpable hesitation, he nodded slightly. I'll consider the offer. That's all I ask, Silas replied. The meeting continued with detailed presentations of the first measures to be implemented and the formation of working groups focused on different aspects of the transformation plan. In the end, many employees approached the team offering ideas, suggestions, and most importantly, expressing support for the initiative. 3 months had passed since that decisive day. The transformation of Horizon Bank was advancing rapidly, though not without challenges. As predicted, there was resistance, technical obstacles, and a need for constant adjustments. Some executives resigned, unable to adapt to the new philosophy. Others, surprisingly, became enthusiastic proponents of the changes, among them Paul Henderson. On a sunny December afternoon, Silas visited the main branch for a quarterly evaluation of the results. Accompanied by Louise and Richard, he observed with satisfaction the visible changes, the redesigned layout to promote accessibility, the new service system that eliminated discriminatory cues, the posters promoting financial education in simple and inclusive language. It's impressive how much we've managed to advance in such a short time, Richard commented, consulting the preliminary reports on his tablet. And the numbers? Silas asked. How are we doing in that regard? Louise smiled before replying, Better than we projected, Dad. The number of active accounts increased by 32% this quarter. Complaints dropped by 47%. And, surprisingly, our profitability is already showing signs of growth, although we are still in the investment phase. It's not surprising to me, Silas replied. I always knew that doing the right thing can also be good for business. We just needed the courage to prove it. At that moment, Caroline approached, accompanied by an elderly woman. Mr. Armstrong, this is my grandmother, Mrs. Joanna, the one who tried to open a savings account and faced difficulties. Silas gave a wide smile, extending his hands to the lady. It's an immense pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Joanna. Your granddaughter has been fundamental in our transformation project. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Armstrong, the elderly woman replied simply. I came to thank you personally, not just for the account I now have, but for the respect with which I am treated when I come here. You know, at my age, being treated with dignity is worth more than money. The old woman's sincere words deeply moved Silas. It was the purest confirmation that they were on the right path. You honor me with your trust. Mrs. Joanna, this bank exists to serve people like you, all people. After Mrs. Joanna's visit, the group headed to the agency's new community area, a space dedicated to financial education activities, guidance for small entrepreneurs, and personalized service for clients with special needs. This is my favorite space, commented Caroline, who now officially held the position of Customer Experience Coordinator. Here we can really make a difference in people's lives. And to think that it all started with a simple man being mistreated because of his appearance, Richard reflected. Actually, it started much earlier, Silas corrected. It started when we forgot that financial institutions exist to serve people, not just fortunes. Fortunately, it's never too late to remember. As they walked through the branch, Employees and clients greeted Silas with respect and even affection, not because of the position he held, but because of the positive impact his actions had brought about. Paul Henderson, now Director of Inclusive Relations, a department specially created after the restructuring, approached with a folder in his hands. "Silas, I'd like to personally present our new microcredit line for small farmers. We based the program on your own story, believing in potential, not just traditional collateral." Silas examined the material with genuine interest. "Impressive, Paul Henderson. You really embraced the cause. I confess I needed time to understand the vision, but once I clearly saw it, well, there was no turning back. It's as if I had discovered a new purpose for my career." That afternoon concluded with a small celebration among the original task force team, now officially transformed into a permanent department of social and financial innovation. In a moment of relaxation, Amanda asked Silas, "There's something that still intrigues me. Why didn't you identify yourself immediately when you entered the bank that day? It would have avoided the inappropriate treatment." Silas smiled before replying, "Precisely for that reason, Amanda. If I had identified myself, I would have seen an artificial version, not the reality. And to transform reality, you first need to know it exactly as it is." "And was it worth it?" Caroline asked. Silas observed the activity of the branch, clients of all backgrounds being served with equal respect, employees engaged in their work, an environment that finally reflected the values he had always championed. "Every second," he replied with conviction, "every second was worth it." At the end of the day, as he returned to his farm in Willow Creek, Silas reflected on the journey of the past few months. The transformation of Horizon Bank was just the beginning. There were already plans to extend the initiative to other companies in the group, creating a ripple effect that he hoped could inspire changes throughout the entire sector. His cell phone rang. It was Aunt Josephine, his housekeeper. "Mr. Armstrong, there's a young man here who wants to speak with you. He says he came to ask for guidance for a family farming project. I told him you wouldn't be back until tomorrow, but he said he can wait." Silas smiled. "What's his name, Josephine?"
We go.
"Michael Sanders. He said he's the brother of that young lady who works at the bank with you. Tell him to wait for me. I'm coming back right away." After hanging up, Silas contemplated the landscape passing by the truck window. Small rural properties, modest villages, simple people working under the sun. People like he had once been, people with unrecognized potential. "Changing plans, Julian. Let's go back to the farm now." "Did something happen, boss?" Silas smiled, feeling a renewed energy. "What happened is that we have more work to do, my friend. Much more work." The cycle was complete. The boy who had once been judged for his simple appearance now used his power and influence to create a world where people were valued for their character and potential, not for their bank account or the clothes they wore. And as the sun set on the Pennsylvania horizon, Silas Armstrong was sure that this was just the first page of a new story. A story where dignity and respect were not privileges, but fundamental rights for all. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Silas Armstrong's journey has touched your hearts and inspired reflections on how we treat each other in our society. To continue this journey of transformation, we have prepared a special collection with equally moving stories that explore the power of empathy and respect. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this narrative resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video your valuable like. Daily, we bring unique stories that illuminate different aspects of the human experience and invite us to be agents of change in our own circle of influence. Share in the comments your own experience with similar situations, or tell us how you have promoted respect and dignity in your community. Remember, small daily actions can create waves of transformation that reach places we never imagined. Until the next story,